The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
2 weeks ago today, over 24 community groups and environmental groups and businesses and trade unions met to issue the 2030 Declaration, a declaration which calls on the government to adopt greenhouse gas emission reduction targets of 50% of 1990 levels by 2030. This would bring us in Nova Scotia in alignment with our country's national commitments on the Paris Agreement, and it would place us at the forefront of GHG reductions in the entire country. So I want to re-express to the Premier the question that was asked 2 weeks ago. Will he support the 2030 Declaration and the reduction of 50% of 1990 by 2030?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the gentleman for the question. I want to reassure him that we are continuing to do the good work that was provided by former Minister of Environment from Kings North, a Minister of Environment who served under the Democratic Party, and a number who served in this party, to continue to make sure Nova Scotia is a leader in the country. Mr. Speaker, we're 30% below 2005 levels now. We'll be on target to be near 50% in 2030. We're continuing to make adjustments. We're not saying that's good enough. We're going to continue to make improvements, whether it's home adaptation programs, ensuring that we continue to make sure and reduce our individual carbon footprint, Mr. Speaker, so that we are and continue to be the leader in Canada.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Nothing about what the Premier has said changes the fact, however, and this is one of the great concerns of the signatories of the 2030 Declaration, that we have stagnated on this, and in fact are not moving forwards but are moving backwards in our commitments to climate change. So we have the 2020 targets because these were part of the all-party process the Premier has spoken about of the environmental goals and sustainable prosperity legislation. But that legislation was to have been reviewed and renewed in 2017. It hasn't been, and that leaves us today in the situation in Nova Scotia where we have no 2030 targets whatsoever. So I want to ask the Premier, why won't he commit to reaching the 2030 Declaration level, the 50% reduction of 1990 by 2030, as a part of the renewing and the reviewing of the EGSPA legislation?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was two components to that piece of legislation. One was continue to make sure that we continue to reduce our greenhouse gas production, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotians should be proud of the work they've been doing. We're leading the country. We'll be well on target for our 2030 targets, Mr. Speaker. The other component of that, Mr. Speaker, was economic growth. We're continuing to make sure that we protect the environment. At the same time, our economy is growing, Mr. Speaker. We're making investments. More young people are choosing to stay in this province. We buck the trend that's happening outside. We see our population growing. We're seeing investments in the private sector, Mr. Speaker. We're doing both, Mr. Speaker. We're protecting the environment and growing the economy.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Well, this is exactly the point, growing the economy and economic growth. We know that today in Canada there are more people working in renewable energy and in energy efficiency than in all of oil and gas and mining and working in the woods put together. And we know that we have the evidence to show from the Green Economy Network that if we adopted the 2030 Declaration, we'd be able in Nova Scotia to create 30,000 person years of work in the areas of sustainable transportation and renewable energy and in energy efficiency. So I want to ask the Premier, is he not concerned that by failing to adopt the 50% below 1990 by 2030 target, we are in fact missing out on one of the real economic opportunities of our generation?
The Honourable Premier.
No, Mr. Speaker. I believe we can do both, Mr. Speaker. We're continuing to ensure that we provide those who are working in our economy today stability, that the jobs will be there for them tomorrow. At the same time, making investments in future opportunities, Mr. Speaker, while we're protecting the environment. Many people throw out all of these stats, Mr. Speaker, veering right or left. The fact of the matter is this is a balanced approach. We've continued to make sure that this province leads the country. Every political party in this House should be proud of the work they've started. Under the former member from Kings North, who started this down the road. All parties supported it through successive elections. When Nova Scotians have changed governments, We've continued down the path to ensuring that we stayed on target to reduce greenhouse gases. The difference, Mr. Speaker, is our party believes as we do that, we should provide economic opportunity for young Nova Scotians, and we're seeing just that. A balanced approach, Mr. Speaker, is providing good opportunities and at the same time protecting the environment.